What's up, guys, and welcome to One Take. Tonight, we are talking about Westworld Season 3, Episode 4, titled The Mother of Exiles. This is, of course, going to be full of spoilers through tonight's episode, but no spoilers from future episodes, and that includes anything shown on the Next Time On preview. So, Jeremy, if you watched that, don't tell me what happens in it.
I will. I did not.
All right,
I did, but I won't.
And it's a good segue to tell you that I'm Gil. I'm talking to my tech guy / brother, Alun.
Yo.
And, of course, my good friend, Jeremy, whose voice you just heard. But why don't you say hello again?
Hello.
And before we jump into the recap, quick reminder that if you're enjoying these videos, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and, of course, the bell icon so you get notified the next time we're live, and you can be a part of the conversation. And then, Jeremy, one last thing before we get into tonight's episode. You made me look foolish last review because, like a dope, I was saying Dolores instead of Delos.
Yeah, I think you only said it once or twice right off the gate, and you plowed on after you said it, so you didn't really pause, and I didn't want to jump in. And if you had said it again, I would have said it, but I really do think you only said it once or twice.
All right, well,
Anyway,
even one
Delos.
mistake here is too many mistakes, so that's the last one we'll ever make. Anyway, tonight's episode I thought was a little bit more complicated. A lot happened, so we're going to take it piece by piece. Let's start with the Maeve character. And before we do that, Drew in the chat says, hello, Gil, Alun, and Jeremy. Hello, Drew. Thanks for joining.
Hello.
Hello, Drew.
But we're not here to talk about Drew. We're here to talk about Maeve. So last time we saw Maeve, she was having a conversation with Serac, who froze her in place and said, hopefully the next time we talk, you'll have reconsidered my offer and realized that we're on the same page. And what Serac was looking for is he wants Maeve to go find Dolores. So here, Maeve wakes up in Singapore with Serac, and they have a conversation where a few things are revealed. Number one, Serac mentions that Paris is essentially gone. He grew up there. We see a quick flashback where it looks like it was destroyed by some kind of atomic bomb, perhaps. And that sort of explains a little bit of his backstory, I think. He says humanity's biggest threat is itself, and seeing that as a child, I'm assuming, is a big motivation for why he thinks that way. He mentions that Rehoboam, his big database, is incomplete, but a map of the human mind exists. Dolores has the key to it. So that is the technology from Westworld. And here we learn a little bit about why Serac wants to get his hands on it. Maeve asks, what's in it for me if I go and get Dolores? Serac reveals, he deals in futures. There's no future for you in my world. Humans and hosts cannot coexist. But Dolores has the key to robot heaven that we saw back in season 2. Your daughter's there. I can get you there. So, a lot to take in there, Jeremy. But like I mentioned, we learned a little bit about Serac's backstory. What did you think about that kind of throwaway, Paris has been destroyed, potentially by a nuclear explosion of some kind?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. This guy obviously has a lot going on that I don't know. It's a very vague, supervillain sounding backstory kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to know more about this guy. He seems very intentionally mysterious.
Right. And I liked the backstory, even though we only got a glimpse of it here. I think it helps us to understand a little bit why he would be so distrustful of humanity and why he feels like he needs to control everybody on the globe. But it did feel a little bit shoehorned in. It was kind of funny where Maeve says, you brought me to Singapore, you could have brought me to Paris. And then Serac chimes in, Paris, yes, I grew up there, it was destroyed. I also find it curious that Maeve is still so motivated by finding her daughter. We know, and of course Maeve knows, that this is not truly her daughter. It was all part of a manufactured narrative. And I wonder, this far into the storyline, does she at all struggle with that idea? If somebody points it out to her, you know that's not really your daughter. Typically, she hasn't responded too well to that. I'm wondering if it's going to be any different this season. And one prediction for me is that when she does inevitably come face to face with Dolores, I've got to think that Dolores will want to try and convert Maeve to her side. And I wonder if part of the way she'll do that is arguing your daughter is an artificially created story by humanity. That's just more of them trying to enslave you.
You know, I just want to say, speaking of manufactured narratives, you're forgetting that Maeve is a robot. For all we know, Serac coded her or programmed her to ask about France because he wanted to talk about Paris.
Fair point. And my view on that has been, of course you say Serac wants Maeve to work for him. So why doesn't he just program her to do that? And my understanding up to this point is that the whole point is that Serac wants to get his hands on that human mind map technology. He even says in this scene, your mind is very complicated. So I think he doesn't know how to control her brain. The only thing he's able to do is create an off switch. He can freeze her, and that's about all he can figure out how to do. And in the chat, we have Support Gaming 2020 who says, hello, new here. Support Gaming 2020, welcome to One Take. If you have any theories that you want to contribute, any thoughts, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, enjoy the show. Anyway, so Serac takes Maeve on a little walk to Bernard's house. And offhand, he mentions that we detected a divergence here. So right there, I think we understand now what those white title screens are that have come up every episode, where it'll say something like divergence detected, and then it'll give us the location that the next scene takes place in. So Jeremy, let me know if you had a different interpretation, but my assumption is that divergence means that this is a divergence from Rehoboam's plan. So Dolores getting involved, messing things up, that's a divergence in humanity's fate that's all been mapped out by Serac's device.
Yeah, that is dead on to how I interpreted that as well. I think it's interesting. I was looking up some stuff about how some of the real life locations where they did the filming, some of those were in Singapore, but I think some of the Singapore stuff was supposed to be like the future LA stuff, but now they're also really in Singapore while being fake in Singapore. There's like meta layers to it that are not even the meta layers just within the show. There's a ton going on.
Right. It's pretty funny when Maeve first wakes up and tells Serac, another simulation. Don't you think you went a little over the top? And it's another meta element because they're almost saying Singapore is so futuristic and so cool it doesn't seem real. And that's actually why it's worked so well for this show, because they want to show us these futuristic architecture, and they do that by shooting in Singapore. And as soon as this quarantine is over, I've got to plan a vacation there because it looks awesome. So they're at Bernard's house, and they see the device that allows you to create hosts. And Maeve comments, this is where she remade herself, in reference to Dolores. Serac reminds her she didn't just remake herself. Remember, she brought back 5 pearls. In the other room, they have a man tied up. We learned he's an identity broker, somebody that you go to if you need a new identity, similar to the Robert Forster character if you're a Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul viewer. Anyway, they try to torture the guy. It doesn't work, but Serac has a trick up his sleeve. He puts glasses on the guy, and we know that these glasses are sort of virtual or augmented reality glasses. And in this case, they show the identity broker what happens to your family if you don't help Serac. He reveals that the mortician is who you want to go see. The mortician is the one that set up Dolores with her fake identity. Once they have the information, Serac shoots the guy in the head and comments that Jung, the name of the fellow that was just killed, is gone. And then turning to Maeve, for your kind, heaven and hell exist, even though they don't for humanity. So think about it, Maeve. You can spend eternity with your daughter, or you could spend it in a cage. And then when Maeve asks, if I get Dolores, why would I even bring her back to you? And that's where we learn that Serac has an off switch and can freeze her. And Support Gaming asks, I don't know if we're doing spoilers. If not, I won't spoil too much. And yes, we are doing spoilers. We're going to go basically beat by beat through the episode, so you're all good. So, talking a little bit more about Serac, we learned a little bit about his backstory in the previous scene. We can understand a little bit about why he feels the need to take control of humanity. But in this scene, to me, he came across as extremely cold-blooded, shooting that guy in the head. He tries to justify it, saying that he was a traitor to his own kind, even if he doesn't realize it. But I hope we're not at the bottom of our exploration of Serac's motivation, because he could be a pretty interesting villain. I would like to poke at this a little bit more. People say, I want to see somebody call him out, essentially. You're trying to, quote unquote, help humanity, but don't you see you've essentially enslaved all of us? And I don't know if it's just me, but I'm getting sort of Thanos vibes from him, right? Where he's trying to supposedly save everybody by doing awful stuff. Any other thoughts?
I absolutely agree with that. It's 100% a Marvel type vibe there, where he's serving some sort of greater good according to him, because of the destruction that he saw in his past. It's an interesting character for sure.
And any thoughts on? It's unclear to me why he wants Maeve so bad. I mean, clearly she's an asset, as we're about to see. She has technology mind control powers. She is a great fighter. But why is she such a powerful weapon against Dolores? You would think somebody like Serac, with all the resources in the world, why do you think he needs her specifically?
I think it has to have something to do with that she is this like host that has been, that has that same kind of extra level of consciousness that that Dolores has. Not quite the same arsenal as Dolores, as we learn later in the episode, but that kind of extra level of she's unlocked, or whatever the Bernard Arnold code word was for that from last season. She has that too, and I think she seems to be the only other person really that has that kind of level of understanding and awareness of everything.
Right. It's still odd to me, though, because having that level of awareness is basically means you're at the level of an average human in some way, where you're quote unquote free, you have free will. The only advantage that she has over humans is that she's super strong because she's a robot. She can't die as easily as a person would. And she does have that control over technology. And maybe that's sort of an artifact in her mind from her time in Westworld, and it is an ability that's not easily recreated, and perhaps that's why, or part of why, she is such an asset to Serac. And then, of course, she does have the pre-existing relationship with Dolores, so that does potentially give some psychological advantage to them. Anyway, Maeve, with this newfound knowledge of the Mortician, strolls through awesome-looking Singapore. We see her mind control abilities at work, where she causes a lot of lights to flicker, so we can see that she can sort of mind meld with technology. Then she fights her way into the Mortician, who hangs out in a sort of morgue-looking place, chopping up bodies. We learn from the Mortician that she gave Dolores the Laura Espin identity. And then we find another piece of information, which is that the Mortician pointed Dolores to the Yakuza because Dolores also wanted 5 bodies. So point A to B, Maeve goes to see the Yakuza. She uses her mind control powers to break through the security, gets in. A bunch of people have guns, but in the future, guns have self-aiming technology, which she can take control of, get them to shoot each other, sword fights a bit. Some pretty great action here. And then it gets to the Yakuza crime boss, who turns out to be Musashi, who you recognize from Westworld Season 2. He was the Hector equivalent in Shogun World. So then they fight, and when she stabs him, the sword goes through him into a barrel, revealing the barrel was not full of alcohol or anything you'd normally find in a distillery. It was full of some of that white host juice, the stuff you need to make more hosts. And then the big reveal, she realizes that Musashi is actually Dolores. And all of the other hosts that we've seen this season, where we were debating the 5 pearls, who were they? Who is in Charlotte's body? And it turns out that Alun and I actually, if you go back to our review of episode 1, we originally thought that the Charlotte Hale was a Dolores clone. So if we stuck to our guns, we would have been right that they're all Dolores clones here. Anyway, before we talk about that big reveal, any thoughts on Maeve's adventure through this episode?
I did think it was an awesome moment before when she's asking those two kind of, thug type guys outside of the club to meet the mortician, and she like shoves the dude's gun in his pants. I thought that was really cool. Like sometimes I find Maeve a little corny, and she is a bit in this, but that part worked for me. That was awesome.
Yeah, it could have come off as cheesy the way she just goes from one plot point to the next. Okay, I gotta find the mortician. All right, boom, boom, boom. Let me find the mortician. Oh, the Yakuza. All right, let me go there. But I think it works because it's just showing us how somebody of her power and her ability, how dangerous it is to have these hosts in the world, especially in 2058 when everything is wired into technology, making us even more vulnerable. So it could have come off as cheesy, but I actually thought it mostly worked here.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And then the Dolores reveal. Let's talk about that. So I know it happens later in the episode, so we're kind of bringing it up early, but just going through Maeve's storyline, she realizes it at the same time as everybody else. What was your reaction to that revelation?
I thought it was great the way they did it because, there was theories out there of, and we, you guys brought it up and we had brought it up too, like, oh, is she, is Charlotte Dolores, or is this person Dolores, or is it, Dolores is herself and the other one is Wyatt or something like that. But I don't think anyone had said that she would be all of them. I think it was a good way of somehow twisting a twist in a way that a million people were theory crafting on. And I mean, I'm sure somebody said that they were all of that, but I thought it was a well done, well orchestrated moment, and the way that they had all of them at once was really good, especially the one with Tessa Thompson and Ed Harris, which I know we'll get to, but that moment was awesome.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like a cheap twist either, because if you go back to season 2, the season ends with Dolores in Charlotte Hale's body. So it's sort of them saying to the audience, you're all the ones who overcomplicated it. We told you Charlotte was Dolores, and guess what? She's still Dolores.
What I'm wondering about Charlotte is if Charlotte is Dolores, it still brings up some questions, because Charlotte was questioning her being and her status with her son and all this stuff. It almost seems like Dolores, the Dolores in the Charlotte body, is starting to question her own being and self.
Well, she even says, I think last episode, that it feels a little bit like the Charlotte personality is trying to take over.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I don't think they have the technology to download a human being's brain in terms of their memories. I mean, we know they can do the book where they map your whole mind. So I don't know the exact nature of the Charlotte Hale host here, but if they took a version of Charlotte's brain book and stuck it in her head, that could explain the identity crisis she's going through. And I think it is pretty fascinating to have 6 different Doloreses out there now, because what is that going to be like? Are they going to each branch off into their own identity, even though they're all starting from the same starting point, the same Dolores? Could it even happen that one of the Doloreses turn on the original one? And that's what I'm wondering with the Charlotte character, because Charlotte's the only one where we've seen that identity crisis. I'm wondering if the others will suffer from the same thing. Maybe they won't. Maybe Charlotte will be unique because she was created in a little bit of a different way. And if she is unique, could she have a crisis where, I don't fully understand Dolores' plan yet, but if it does gear a little bit towards what we saw last season, where it seemed like all-out destruction of the human race, if Charlotte is starting to care about her son, I have a feeling she might have a couple things to say about that. So I love the twist. I love that we got the twist in episode 4 and not in episode 8, because that's probably my biggest complaint with mystery box shows, is that they don't want to reveal the twist. But once you get the twist, you say, that's really interesting. I wish we could have explored that more. But you saved it till the end of the season, and now it's too late. So they've completely avoided that issue. And not to keep harping on it, but once again, you've taken all my previous complaints from season 2 and maybe a little bit even in season 1 and eradicated them. So Loving the show this season. Support Gaming in the chat says, this makes me think if the post-credit scene with William in season 2 was actually in the future, where it's host William. And actually on that point, so in season 2, in the post-credit scene, you see a version of William that is pretty clearly a host. And from the interviews we've seen about this show, I think it's pretty clear that that post-credit sequence is pretty far into the future. In fact, I would venture to guess that it takes place after all of the events we're seeing here in season 3. But I have a feeling we'll be talking about it again towards the end of this season. So the Maeve story ends here with Musashi, who we know is truly Dolores, stabbing Maeve in the gut and leaving her bleeding on the floor. Get a great visual of her blood mixing with all of the white host juice. Now, Jeremy, I'm assuming, and again, for people watching this live, we did not watch the Next Time On preview, so this may have been revealed, but I'm assuming Maeve lived through this, and Serac or someone from Serac's team will bring her back, right?
I would agree with that, yeah. I mean, I can't, I mean, lived is such a weird phrase for her and this whole show anyway, but yeah, I would think she had to. It is a great shot, though. I feel like it's going to be everybody's Reddit background or something, and comparisons to the painting that Ford does the whole human brain thing with in season 1, and a lot of cool visual stuff going on there.
Yeah, and Support Gaming in the chat, by the way, adds that in the future scene where William is a host, most likely Emily in that scene may be Dolores. And I have to think you're probably not wrong there. Hard to say for sure, but that's a very good guess. And Sergio says the guy, so I think that's Connell, the bodyguard guy for Liam, who has Dolores's host brain in his head, is going to turn into the Wyatt personality. I would say if not actually the Wyatt personality, then something very close to it. So let's leave Maeve and let's talk about my favorite dynamic duo this season, Bernard and Stubbs. They're in Victorville, California. So Stubbs pulls up an image of Dolores hanging out with Liam. Bernard mentions that he thinks Dolores is killing and replacing people. So he thinks that Liam has probably been killed and replaced with a host. We know that's not the case. And Bernard has created a device that can freeze hosts, similar to the one that Serac has. So I don't have a whole lot to say about this scene in particular, except I love watching Bernard and Stubbs hang out. The moment that we saw they were in a motel room together and Bernard brought, I think, some beers back for the two of them, it's just a joy. And I can't remember the last time I watched Westworld and just had fun. Usually it's intriguing. I'm interested to see what happens next, but it's just it's a joy watching these scenes.
And I did think that we were going to get when he cracked the beer, I thought we were going to get like a a la his brother Fat Thor version of Stubbs there with the t-shirt and the beer, and he was all, grumpy kind of. Anyway, totally agree with you. Yes, great scenes.
Yeah, maybe by the end of the season we'll see he gets pretty depressed and starts to look a little bit like Thor.
Loses an eye. Yeah.
Let's jump over to Caleb and Dolores. Before we do that, again, if you're watching this live, just a quick reminder to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell icon so you get notified the next time we go live. And like Nick Leo, Jamie Wells, Support Gaming 2020, and Sergio Cavazos Jr., you too can be an awesome, amazing person by participating in the One Take Chat. So let's talk about Caleb and Dolores. We see them shopping. Cal buys a nice suit, and we're not sure exactly what they're doing. It starts to become clear when Dolores accidentally bumps into a guy, knocks him out, steals some of his blood, which she injects into Caleb. The blood has some encryption stuff in it, and they need it in Caleb's bloodstream so they can go to a bank and steal all of Liam's money. So, Jeremy, what were your thoughts on, what were your thoughts on the Cal-Dolores storyline here? I kind of breezed through a bunch of stuff there, but that whole sequence.
Yeah, I mean the bank sequence was great, very tense. Obviously, they're setting up that there could be a big giant shootout. She teases at them. This was the most that Caleb has reminded me of Jesse Pinkman in that he's like kind of in a bad spot. He's not the cleanest dude of all time, but then he ends up getting in way over his head with somebody. And then also, right, I feel like I had that reaction as I was watching it, and then as I said it, the next thing is she's shooting a needle into his arm. So wow,
Right.
this is very Breaking Bad, heavy vibes. But yeah, the scene was great. It was really tense. Of course, they have the like, oh, it didn't work because you were sweating too much. Let me wipe it off,
Yeah.
and then it works. Was great moment, really tense. I think it was really tense, even if you're not processing the 10 million different layers of stuff going on and who's who and when is when and all that stuff. So I thought it was really good.
Right. And Sergio says, so they don't have facial recognition in the bank. Yeah, it's a pretty good point. And I don't think I have a response to that. Jeremy, did I miss anything that would explain why they couldn't use simple facial recognition to know this isn't the guy? Let's chalk it up to Dolores thought about that and use some robot hacking trickery behind the scenes in advance.
Let's go. It's all the whole thing takes place inside a simulation, so it's not supposed to do that. That's why.
Mel Lee in the chat says the score made that scene, and I have a lot to say about the score in this episode. Well, really not that much to say, besides it's awesome. And I think every episode this season feels like it has a little bit of a different take on the score. This episode was pretty orchestral. Stringed instrument heavy versus episode 1 that was a little bit more synthy and felt a little bit more Blade Runner. The one thing they have in common is they're all great. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the party, Liam's party. So a couple thoughts before we get there. I will say the Cal character is one that I found pretty intriguing and pretty empathetic early on in the season. Here, it feels a little bit like he's just there for the ride. He doesn't do a whole lot this episode to kind of have his own agency. He's just going along with Dolores. So, didn't find him that interesting here, but fair enough. I think it makes sense he'd be in that role for the moment. But the problem is, it's also unclear to me exactly what Dolores's motivation is, because she says on the surface it's to take down Insight's whole Rehoboam system, basically free humanity from slavery, the same slavery she suffered from in Westworld. But I don't quite trust her, because last season it seemed like she was a lot more into the whole human genocide concept. So I don't totally trust her, and as a result of that, it's hard for me to root for her. And with Caleb kind of taking a back seat this episode and really just being along for the ride, I enjoyed these scenes, but not quite as much as I enjoyed some of Maeve's stuff or some of Bernard's stuff this episode. Also, still a little unclear to me why Dolores wants Caleb's help. It might be as simple as he's a henchman, he's obviously into the idea, so he's useful, but I wonder if there's something more to it. Either does he play a role in her grander plan, or maybe is it an emotional thing where she truly does relate to him as being trapped in the same way she was, and for maybe the first time in a while, we're seeing Dolores make a little bit of an emotional decision rather than a purely robot logical one. Anyway, from there, they steal all of Liam's money, and then we get to the masquerade party, where a lot of our storylines intersect. So Liam is there with some friends. It's a pretty crazy party, the kind of party I would imagine rich people have 50 years from now. They're auctioning off prostitutes, basically. And they offhand mention, don't worry, they've all got their shots. It's all going to charity. So a pretty eyebrow-raising, interesting scene. Caleb and Dolores show up. And to the mention of the score earlier, the orchestral music we hear in the background starts to pick up an intensity the moment the two of them show up, and that's when you know something's about to go down. Liam tries to participate in an auction, finds out all of his money is gone, and then Bernard and Stubbs show up. And in one of my favorite moments of the episode, Bernard starts clicking that device at Liam, trying to freeze him, and then realizes that Liam is still human, has not been replaced by a host. So Stubbs decides to go the old-fashioned way, pulls out a gun, and it tells Liam, we're getting out of here. But Dolores shows up, starts shooting at them, and then we get Dolores versus Stubbs. Dolores tells Stubbs, "You should have stayed out of this." And Stubbs says, "Not up to me." They fight. Dolores wins the fight, ends up knocking Stubbs over a balcony.
I love Stubbs. I love how self-aware he is, where he's like, I can't control this, but hey, I'll go with it. He just accepts himself. It's kind of nice.
It reminded me, you and I have complained before about when you watch a movie like Pirates of the Caribbean and you have two characters sword fighting each other. They're laughing, having a good time. The score is kind of jovial, and it feels like they're not really trying to kill each other. Here, I felt like you got the fun vibe of a Pirates of the Caribbean, where you've got the great music, Stubbs is having a good time, but they are actually trying to kill each other. I bought it. I found it interesting when Stubbs says, "It's not up to me." I feel a little bit bad for him because it really isn't up to him. And I don't really know his level of awareness. Does he have as much consciousness as Dolores or any of the other hosts to have awakened? And if he does, at some point, is he going to start to have some agency and say, maybe I don't want to go along with all this? And if they don't go that route, I'll be okay with it because Stubbs is just such a good time to watch. But it'll also be interesting if they decide to give him some more agency and maybe he doesn't want to go along with all these plans. But there is a lot going on and only 4 episodes to go, so there might just not be space for it. Outside the party, Caleb catches up to Liam, and so does Bernard. Connells shows up. That's Liam's bodyguard, who is actually Dolores. He pulls out a gun, shoots a few people, and then tells Liam to get out of there, tells Caleb to go after him. Connells and Bernard have a conversation. Bernard says that he figured Dolores would have replaced Liam with a host, but she must have wanted to keep him around for something, and she replaced you, Connells, instead. Connells says he's surprised Bernard doesn't recognize his old friend. Boom. Bernard realizes he's looking at Dolores, and that's again where we get to the mic drop moment of the episode, where everyone realizes the various hosts they're dealing with are all copies of Dolores. And Jeremy, you already alluded to the fact that you loved the way they did the reveal across the different storylines simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. This one is probably the second place one to the William one as the icing on the cake there. But this was great. I think my favorite part of this one actually, and it also happens in that moment you're talking about where Bernard is pressing the button, is we got to see a little bit of one of my favorite moments of season 2. Very, very confused Bernard, where he is just like, "What the?" And like he just says that a lot and doesn't really know what's going on and is slowly trying to put everything together. It was annoying in season 2 because it was nonstop and he couldn't remember everything. And he scrambled his own memory. But here in these little bits, it's like really good because you feel like you're with him. Like he is very much what the viewer is going through, the same way, that you were just saying before. You're trying to figure out why Dolores would have done this and kept this guy alive, or why is she with Caleb anyway? Like he's trying to figure out all that stuff too. I think he's much more fun to root for when we're not constantly frustrated that he can't remember anything. Like when we feel like we're in the same page of him, like my Bernard or Arnold or whatever sympathy empathy factor is very high, and that moment was a great moment. I feel like you're really rooting for him there.
Yeah, and there was a moment earlier in the episode where you see a quick flashback to Dolores waking up the new Bernard host, and you see that confused look on his face. And Alon, my brother, and I immediately looked at each other and were like, oh no, is confused Bernard back? Because like you alluded to in season 2, it was so frustrating. Jeffrey Wright is a great actor. And last season, he just had the same expression on his face at all times, that confused expression. And I was so happy this season to see him break out of that. And at this point, when he realizes that Connells is Dolores and Liam isn't a clone, isn't a host, I think we can allow him a moment of confusion. I think it's fair, and we're on the same page as him, like you said.
Absolutely.
Speaking of confused, Caleb catches up with Liam, throws him against the wall. Liam is very confused. Then Dolores shows up, and Liam is even more confused. And it was a moment just I think they've done a lot to streamline the show. It's got to be a little bit confusing because that's some of the fun of Westworld is the theorizing, is the fact that the characters don't know everything, we don't know everything. This was probably the first time this season, though, where it approached, I thought, season 2 levels of confusion, which just with the sheer quantity of things going on. And it makes me wonder a little bit why they wanted to shorten the season to 8 episodes, because it feels like even this episode could have maybe taken place over a couple of episodes. But if you're going to go one way or the other, I do prefer this tighter, not waiting 10 episodes to give you a reveal approach. I also mentioned, I think a little bit already, how Cal felt a little bit of a non-entity this episode. He's really just along for the ride. And Dolores, I've said a couple times as well, her motivation's a little unclear to me exactly what she's trying to accomplish. And specifically here, what does she want with Liam? Why can't she simply kill him and replace him with a clone? My thought on that is he has some knowledge about Serac. I think it's clear that he knows who Serac is, and he refused to give that information up earlier. But if Dolores kills him, I don't think she has, like we said before, any technology to extract memories from his brain. So at this point, with so much taken away from him, with Cal and Dolores so clearly with power over him, I think he might be at a point where he's willing to talk and give Dolores some information that she needs on Serac. Before we leave the Dolores-Caleb storyline for this episode, Jeremy, any thoughts on storyline as a whole?
Yeah, you know what? I just had one actually while kind of looking at all these things written down next to each other. And this is a really dumb thing. I feel like every Westworld thought I've ever had, this is either really dumb or like IQ 1 million level. Have we ever tried to do any kind of connection between that Liam and William, like just because their names are similar, and there's this allusion to this like dad that we don't know who it is and we haven't seen, and you never know what timeline anything is ever taking place in Westworld, even though it looks like everybody figures out the Dolores thing right on top of each other at the same second. Maybe they're actually very far apart, and because I originally thought that the Liam father reveal was going to somehow be like a Ford analog, maybe, but now maybe I'm thinking it's like a William related thing. I don't know. I just thought, just looking at the word Liam on top of the word William is what made me realize that, or have that dumb thing. So I don't know. There's my dumb thought of the week for Westworld.
Well, we know that Westworld likes to play with names, and actually we alluded to it last episode where, and again, I forget the name, but Bernard's secret identity that he was using when he was on the run, if you scramble it, it can scramble to spell damaged Arnold. So
perfect.
Yeah, so I wouldn't put it past them. Liam, William, they are both clearly working in similar fields. They both clearly have, I was going to say they both clearly have similar interests, but I don't really know what Liam is interested in. In fact, I felt pretty bad for him in this episode. It feels like left and right, everyone is just giving him a hard time, and he has so little idea of what's going on. Like when Connells gets him to sign that paper, Liam refuses at first, and then Connells just basically rips him apart and says, "You don't want to have financial responsibility, just sign this paper and get back to your extracurricular activities." So I felt kind of bad for him here, and I have no idea, like I said, what his interests are, what his motivation is. Is he going to just give up all of his knowledge on Serac and then die, or will there be a connection with William? We'll find out. And just going to the chat for a second, Sergio asks, what if Bernard is another copy of Dolores, made from all the memories she remembers of him? Well, in a sense, we know that that's at least partially true. She did try to recreate Bernard from her memory, and you've got to think that her memories are going to be biased in some way, and he's not going to be a perfect recreation. But that does make me wonder if Dolores did plant anything in there. In fact, we know Bernard was suspecting the same thing. He kept trying to deep dive into his own mind to see if she did anything to him. And I have a feeling, we're not talking about it too much this episode or last episode. Wouldn't shock me if sometime before the end of the season, that comes back? Is Bernard secretly a ticking time bomb of some kind? And Jamie adds, I still don't feel like the timeline is clear. I think some of that is just because we are so suspicious of Westworld when it comes to timelines. So anytime we see something, we see the scene transition from one scene to another, I question, what timeline are we in? But every episode so far, by the end of the episode, I think I come to the conclusion, everything we're seeing is roughly happening at the same time. Last episode, Dolores tells Charlotte to go see an old friend. This episode, we see Charlotte visit William. So, unless they're really going to try and pull that twist again, I think the timeline is pretty clear. The only time it's unclear is just because so many things are happening at once, and we have a built-in suspicion of Westworld timelines. So, let's get to William. We see William for the first time this season. He's in his house. It's all trashed. And we quickly see he's lost his mind. He's talking to his dead daughter. He doesn't know what's real, what's not real. He is questioning whether or not he even has agency. Does he have free will, or is he programmed like a robot? And his daughter asks him, are you free and guilty, or are you a slave to the code and blameless in all this? So this is our first time. This is the first time we saw William this season. Jeremy, first reactions to our William introduction in season 3.
Love it, all about it. Easily my favorite storyline through, basically from the beginning of the series. So very interested. I don't know if it's just that I like Ed Harris so much, or he does such a great job, but just his trying to figure everything out, and he's a wreck, and the house is a wreck, and the weird. I mean, the scene with the daughter was awesome, where she just starts like bleeding from where he shot her. Basically, I don't know. It was really, really good. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I actually felt I felt a little bit different about that scene. So I love Ed Harris, and the William character is one I was very curious about in season 3, because it felt like at the end of season 2, where else do you go with this character? He spent the first 2 seasons chasing after something that essentially didn't exist, killed his own daughter, and it felt like his life should now end in tragedy. But somehow he lived. So where do we go from here? I was super curious, and I like the idea of this having destroyed him to such a degree that he doesn't know what's real or not anymore. That felt very in character to me, and it also felt in character that once you take him out of the park, he can barely function anymore. I loved that. But one of my least favorite tropes in all of television is characters that talk to hallucinations of dead characters, because they almost always use it as a way to turn a character's inner thoughts and psyche into exposition. So where you would have to depend on Ed Harris's facial expressions and acting, muttering him to himself maybe, to communicate that he's so broken and trying to figure out what's real or not, instead you have a hallucination of his daughter basically saying all that. So I admit, though, that's kind of a bias where I'm just against the idea in principle, and I'm not really talking about the execution of it, in the scene. But I just have such a visceral reaction anytime characters have dreams or hallucinations that tell us what's going on. I just have a problem with it. So I admit that's just my visceral reaction. I get the feeling we haven't seen the last of hallucination Emily. So I'll go with it and see if my tune changes a little bit over the next few episodes. Also, just a side note, if you're not watching the show Devs, I highly recommend it, because it is exploring the same themes as Westworld, and every episode I'm shocked at just how similar it is. I don't want to say any more than that because it's kind of spoilery, but I wonder what that says about just humanity as a whole right now in our zeitgeist, that we seem to be so interested in these ideas of free will versus determinism, what's real, what's not, etc. So, Charlotte shows up at William's house. You and I were trying to figure out last episode, who is the old friend that Charlotte is going to see? We find out it's William. Charlotte tells William about the mole. She tells him about the hostile takeover and tells William, we need you to come to an emergency board meeting tonight for Delos. We're going to have a vote. We want to take the thing. We want to take the company private. But before they leave, Charlotte reveals to William that she is actually Dolores, and William doesn't take that news very well. He starts to lose it, and it turns out the people who were there to drive him to Delos are actually employees with the mental institution. He's fighting back against them, looks completely crazy. So they go to lock him up. But before they take him away, Charlotte pricks a little bit of his blood. Now, Jeremy, do you have any theories? Now, my assumption is she puts him in the mental institution to basically take him off the board, get him out of the way. Because now, with him ruled as incompetent, she takes over his voting rights. But there was that little prick of blood. Any What was that all about?
I don't know. I mean, we saw blood be important earlier in the episode, although it was a little bit more than that tiny little droplet. So I'm not sure, but they've definitely planted the seeds of blood being important in some way. I don't know. Maybe she needs to prove that she has had contact with him to someone else, or maybe his blood is some kind of a key in the same way that her mind has the key to unlocking the Delos secrets. His blood has the key to something else.
Right. I wonder if it ties at all into the season 2 post-credit scene. In my initial reaction would be maybe she needs the blood in order to create the William host. But I would think that with the amount of time William spent in the park, they know everything they need to know about his mind. And I got to imagine they could easily get some of his blood or some of his DNA. But I just wonder if it ties into that. And to your point, they went out of their way this episode to show us that blood can be important. It can include an encryption key. So maybe William's blood, I think that is the most likely theory, includes some kind of a key, some kind of an encryption. There's something in there that she needs. Alexander in the chat says, I don't think all of the hosts are Dolores. Maybe one of them isn't. I'd be interested to hear if you have more of that theory. Is there anything that would have indicated that to you, or is it just a suspicion you have? I could easily see Westworld pulling that twist, but there's nothing that would have jumped out at me. I try to pay attention to the hosts and see if I can spot any mannerisms that would give away at all who they are. And I think that Jonathan Nolan and the writers for Westworld, they know we're doing that, and they're trying to throw us off. So last episode, when you see Dolores and Charlotte, I think they did a really good job of making that scene easily interpreted as very maternal, or you could have interpreted it as almost romantic when they lie in the bed together. So people were throwing out theories that it could be Teddy or it could be Clementine, and all those theories seemed equally valid because they're doing such a good job of masking those mannerisms or leaving it all open to interpretation. So open to the theory that one of them isn't Dolores, but it feels like we don't have a lot to go on there. Anyway, so William is taken to his institution, and my first reaction is it seems like a pretty nice place. We don't get to see a whole lot of it, but he seems like he's got some space there, some nature, or at least some artificial nature. He's in an all-white suit, which is interesting because typically he's the man in black. So I don't know if that's going to be foreshadowing anything. Then he has another hallucination where Dolores in her old Westworld blue outfit shows up, and she says, I guess there is some justice after all. She says, this was Emily's last wish, that you would waste your days rotting in an institution, prisoner of your own sins. Guess you reached the center of your maze, William. But the maze is about understanding. You still don't even realize who you are. Was any of this your choice? Ask me the question, William, the answer you so desperately want to know. He sort of mumbles about Emily, his daughter, and then she says, welcome to the end of the game. Dolores disappears. We zoom out. So, what are your thoughts, Jeremy, on anything about William? I mean, where are they going with his character? What is Dolores telling him here? Just help me understand what's going on with William.
Yeah, I don't know. It was another one of those classic like Westworld. It feels like there's so many things going on. I will say my gut reaction to what you just said was that I did not interpret it as that he said Emily. I thought he said M-I.
Oh, I think you're right about that. I think you're right.
Which was like a is he real, which is just to jump back to what you were saying about not liking the daughter hallucination stuff. I kind of agree with you, but I think like this show has so much of that stuff that that's where I would give it a pass, but my bias is that I just really like the show. So but if he's not real, or if he is real, or is a host and is somebody else, and there's weird memories trying to claw themselves inside from him, like I think there's so many ways that could work within the context of who he is or might be, that I think that's my way of giving that a free pass. I don't know. I thought the last scene was really interesting. I got kind of like end of Psycho sort of vibes with him like sitting there up against the thing, and the camera is zooming back, like the the classic he couldn't harm a fly, that scene. But yeah, I don't know. It reminded me of like weird season 1 stuff again. Like it sounded like all the forward cryptic dialogue about the maze, which I'm pretty sure I still don't understand what the maze is. I don't know if I liked it almost felt like too mysterious, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't interpreted it the right way yet, but it felt too vague to me. I didn't really like it.
The maze, you're saying?
The maze, and just her little like line there at the end, welcome to the game, or whatever she says.
Right.
Her Doctor Strange, we're in the end game now line. it was just like very, I don't know. It felt like someone else trying to write a Westworld dialogue instead of Westworld.
Right. I find it so interesting because I feel like this is the second time we've seen what could easily be an endpoint for the William character. Last season, I thought he was dead, or it seemed like, I mean, we saw that he survived, but it felt like he was going to die. No, he didn't. And then here, he's completely lost his mind. His lifelong pursuit has led him to his own daughter's death and the total shattering of his psyche, where he doesn't even know if he's real or not. He doesn't know what's real. Now he's locked up in an institution. It feels like could be the end of his character, but I don't know what happens the rest of this season, but I imagine it's not. And that's interesting to me because I would love to see a redemption story of some kind, or the other way it could go is he becomes sort of a villainous character. But it's interesting because I'm almost just curious about what happens next, not because they've set something up to happen, but because they haven't set something up to happen. It feels like another ending. So just very curious to see where we go from here.
And maybe he never
William's
left
character.
Westworld. Maybe it's like it was an entire simulation the entire time, like the Rick and Morty, you took him back to the carpet store kind of a scene. Maybe it's like that kind of situation. He never actually left. So that's what she means why it's the end of the game. He's finally done with Westworld.
Could be. It could be. And does that mean William is dead and this is just a copy of his mind living in a simulation? We get some allusions to that. We've gone back to it a couple of times, but the season 2 post-credit sequence, we see a presumably host version of William going through the fidelity test. So, yeah, curious to see where we go with the William character. Any other thoughts on episode 4 as a whole?
No, I enjoyed it. It was hectic and really quick moving, and I think I know things, but I mostly don't know things, and it was good. This was a good Westworld episode, I thought.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel the same way. I've said it a million times, but I'm really enjoying season 3. I feel like they have course corrected this show so well, and I know some people enjoyed season 2. I enjoyed aspects of it. It probably didn't help that I binged almost all of it in one day, so I finished that day with a pretty splitting headache, but I'm absolutely loving season 3. But before we wrap up, let's go to some of the comments in the chat. Grant Noble says, can we talk about that one of the prostitutes was the girl host that originally greeted William and Logan at the park? For a second, I thought the same thing, but I think they just looked a little bit similar. Jeremy, did you have the same reaction, or did you not see that similarity at all?
I did not. I know who you're talking about because she played such a big role last season, but I did not have that thought.
Mm-hmm.
What's her, Angela, right?
Angela, I think that's right. That's right. And what's the significance of of Charlotte Hale Dolores asking if she's going to kill or replace her? Dolores knows, quote unquote, Dolores knows Dolores would do that if necessary. And that just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that we've got 6 copies of of Dolores out there right now, assuming that all of the hosts are actually Dolores. And it does seem like the original Dolores would do what's necessary. If one of them got out of line, I don't think she would hesitate to destroy one of them and simply replace them. And so it would be very interesting to me if we did see one of the Dolores clones go rogue. And I think it would be interesting from a plot mechanic standpoint and also interesting from a sci-fi philosophical standpoint. Make a copy of someone's consciousness. What does that do in terms of your identity? How do you become your own person? Are you doomed to follow what was planted for you originally, or can you become your own man or woman? But we'll see if they decide to explore that at all. Anyway, I think we can probably wrap it up there. There's a lot of other questions and comments in the chat, but it's getting into some heavy theorizing where, Jeremy, I think you and I probably need to put our thinking caps on and let this episode marinate for a couple of days. Maybe we'll jump back on if we have any good theories to talk about before the next episode. So I think with that, we can wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, quick reminder, again, hit that like button, subscribe button, and hit the bell icon so you get notified the next time we do a video or the next time we go live, so you too can participate in the chat. If you have any other thoughts, theories, questions that you didn't get to post in the live chat, go ahead and leave that in the comments below, and we'll keep this discussion going. Nick Leo in the chat asks, any chance Devs 6 will drop soon on the pod feed? The answer to that is yes. We've been a little bit derelict in our duties on maintaining the podcast feed, but we'll get all of that posted in the podcast feed. So if you prefer to just listen as audio instead of video, you can do that. So let's wrap it up there. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for participating. And we'll see you on the next One Take.